This is the story of the princess who was queen for just 9 days. It's me. And this is our channel. And now, back to our story. The year is 1553. King Edward VI of England has died at the age of 15. His half-sister, the 25-year-old Lady Jane Grey, has been hastily crowned queen, but she doesn't want the job. Having been raised as a Protestant in a Catholic country, she wants nothing more than to live out her days in blissful ignorance of politics, which is why she had never even considered the possibility of becoming queen. But that's all changed when her father, Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, pays her a surprise visit and tells her she must accept the throne. Jane's mother had recently died, and her father thought this would be the perfect opportunity to advance his own power by marrying Jane to his friend's son, Guilford Dudley, and making her heir to the throne. However, he hadn't counted on the fact that her cousin, the 42-year-old Lady Catherine Parr, would beat them to the punch by marrying Edward VI and becoming Edward's First Lady of the Bedchamber. As a result, it was Catherine who was asked by Edward to take over as regent, while he was incapacitated by illness. So when Edward fell gravely ill, Catherine wasted no time in having herself appointed as Edward's sole guardian. She knew that under the terms of the regency, it would fall to her to choose a successor once Edward perished. And so it was that when Edward died on July, it was Catherine who ascended to the throne. Jane was staying at her father's house in Suffolk. When her father came to tell her the news, he was also there to tell her that she was going to be queen. But Jane refused. She told him she didn't want his help or his crown. In fact, she didn't even want to be queen if he were to die. Her father realized she was upset about the recent death of her mother and gave her some time alone. Then he went off to London to figure things out. Meanwhile, Jane and her uncle, Lord Robert Grey, were left alone in Suffolk. Robert Grey wrote a letter to Sir Thomas Bridges, Keeper of the Privy Seal, informing him of the situation and asking him to come to Suffolk to discuss it further. But before Bridges could arrive, Jane's father returned, along with an escort of armed men, and told Jane she was to come with him to London and accept the crown. At first, she resisted, but ultimately agreed to go after her father promised that she wouldn't have to actually become queen. Once in London, Jane was escorted to Hampton Court Palace, where she spent 2 days relaxing and recovering from her ordeal. Meanwhile, Bridges presented Jane with a letter from her cousin, Lady Catherine Parr, asking her to come to London immediately. It was a simple formality, really, since everyone knew what was going to happen. After all, it was Parr who had set everything in motion and written a letter to Parliament declaring herself queen. However, Jane's father didn't seem to realize this and told her that this was just another attempt by her enemies to force her to accept the crown. Once again, he convinced her to come with him, only this time to Windsor Castle, where he believed she would be safe. And indeed, she was safe. Or rather, she would have been if she hadn't been betrayed by her own father. You see, while Jane was being held in Windsor Castle, her father, along with most of the nobility, went to meet with Lady Catherine Parr in London. And upon their arrival, they learned that she had already made herself very unpopular by raising taxes and closing down most of the businesses in the city. They pleaded with her to allow Jane to become queen instead, but she refused. They tried reasoning with her, saying that Jane was the rightful heir because she was Protestant and England needed a Protestant monarch. But Catherine stood firm. Eventually, the nobles got so angry that they threatened civil war unless Catherine stepped down and Jane took the throne. Of course, Jane's father wasn't one of these nobles. In fact, he was on Catherine's side, although he would later recant his support. Lady Jane Grey was brought to London and locked up in the Tower of London until it was time for her coronation. The night before the coronation, her father slipped poison into the wine of the constable of the tower in an effort to kill him and make his daughter look like a martyr. However, the plan failed when one of the servants drank the poisoned wine instead. The next day, Jane's father walked her down the aisle and placed the crown on her head. She became Queen of England at the age of 17. As soon as she was crowned, her father disappeared, leaving her and her husband to fend for themselves. She was given very little training for her new role, and many courtiers and advisors felt that she was too young to rule. While Jane was understandably overwhelmed, she did her best to live up to her responsibilities. She released political prisoners and appointed Protestants to positions of power. But as time went on, it became clear that she wasn't cut out for the job. Her cousin, Lady Catherine Parr, tried to guide her, but the two women couldn't come to an agreement on how to handle certain situations. For example, Lady Catherine wanted to raise money by selling titles, but Jane refused to allow it. Eventually, Lady Catherine grew tired of Jane's indecisiveness and plotted to overthrow her. With the help of the Duke of Northumberland, Lady Catherine forced Jane to sign away her powers and abdicate the throne. Jane was then imprisoned in the Tower of London. She and her husband were charged with treason and given the option to confess and receive a lighter sentence, but they both refused, so they were executed together. Lady Jane Grey is a tragic figure in English history. She was a young girl who was thrust into a position she wasn't prepared for, and she paid the ultimate price for her father's treachery. Her story has been romanticized in novels and films, but the truth is that she was just a pawn in a game of power and politics. Now, it is worth pointing out that Lady Jane Grey wasn't actually the first person to hold the title of Queen for just 9 days. That distinction belongs to Lady Anne Neville, who was Queen in 1470. But we'll save her story for another day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, please like and subscribe so you never miss an upload.